Today we are finally going to finish this track. Last stage of production is mastering. Many producers use external services for mastering, and that is actually recommended. But if you're cheap or want to learn to do stuff yourself, like I do, this video will get you started. I'm no mastering engineer myself, but I know some basics, so most of the time I master my own tracks. Just like mixing, mastering is a very deep topic and you won't get good at it by watching only tutorials. You just have to do it over and over again to train your ears and find what works. That's one reason I'll do my own masters. I wanna get better at it. So let me show you my process. After my mixing tutorial, I took a break from the track and now I listened it again with rested ears. I felt like I wanted to do a couple of small tweaks before mastering. I wanted this kick to be a little bit softer, so I pulled down some low mids and high mids. I also think this shaker had too much high frequencies, so I pulled those down as well. And there's one thing I forgot to mention in the mixing tutorial. You should also listen to your mix with a couple of different speakers, not just with your studio monitors or headphones. And that is one way to find out possible issues within your mix. So, I think my mix is ready now and I can start mastering. Basically, you could master your track here by adding plugins to your master channel. But it is recommended that you export your track to audio first. So I will export my track as 44.1 kHz wave file and I will set bit depth to 24 bits. Using 24-bit export gives us wider dynamic range for mastering. I typically create a new project for mastering. This way there are no distracting elements in the project. So I will import my track to this empty project. Here we have our track and here's our master channel. I add my mastering plugins for this track's own audio channel and not on my master channel. That's because if I were to master more than one track, for the EP for example, I would master all tracks in this same project. And every track would need a different mastering settings. Okay, now we can build our mastering chain in here. There are some guidelines on what plugins you should use and in what order. The most basic mastering chain could be just EQ, compressor and limiter. However, I have a little bit more than that in my chain. I have saved preset for it and here's what I have. There's EQ, multiband compressor, imager, analog emulation and mastering limiter. I'm using only Cubase plugins in this case. If you're using different DAW, you can probably find some similar stock plugins there. Or you can use Google to find free plugins. You shouldn't go buy expensive third-party plugins at this point. Just learn to use what you have, and once you know your plugins inside out, you could consider buying something else. This is a mistake I did when I started. I bought a lot of FabFilter plugins because I saw professionals use them, and I thought they would make my track instantly better. Well, guess what? They didn't. It's not the plugins, it's how you use them. And that skill comes only with time. There's no magical plugin or tutorial that will make your track suddenly awesome. It's the time you invest into practicing and experimenting. Okay, back to mastering chain. Let's start with the EQ. In here, you don't want to do anything drastic. If you need to do things like this, then there's something wrong with your mix and you gotta go back to it and fix it there. One very common tip is to use higher Q values when cutting and lower Q when boosting. That will give more musical end result. I typically try to boost my bass here and see how it sounds. You could maybe try high shelf as well. But since we're making lo-fi, we don't want too much of stuff in the high range. Then we can make sharp boost to sweep this frequency range to see if there's something we don't like. This low mid area has quite resonant frequencies sometimes, so it might be a good idea to check that. As you can see, I am doing very subtle cuts and boosts here, maybe 3 dB max. Okay, next plugin in the chain is Multiband compressor. I start by soloing my lowest band and adjust its range. I just make sure that I can hear all fundamental frequencies of my bass notes in this low range. I'll leave rest of the bands to default. Then I'll just play with the threshold of each band to get just a little bit of compression. It's very subtle difference, like all the mastering changes should be. Next plugin in the chain is Imager. In the mixing tutorial I talk about stereo widening. This plugin does exactly that, but it has been divided into 4 bands just like Multiband compressor. I will adjust the frequency range of my lowest band to same range that I had in my Multiband compressor. With the lowest band I will pull width all the way down. Basically we did this already in the mixing stage. If you remember, I turned my kick and bass to mono. Now pay attention to this graph. There are numbers -1, 0 and +1. If the marker is all the way into 1, then the band is completely mono. And as it goes lower towards -1, signal gets more wider. You should keep all of these above 0. In that way you shouldn't get any phasing issues. Basic rule here is higher you go in frequency range, more you can add stereo width. So let's adjust the width of each band. As you can see, higher the frequency range of the band is, closer to 0 we are. Next plugin in the chain is Magneto 2. This plugin simulates saturation and compression of analog tape machines. With this one I typically just use some of the presets. Just listen what sounds good. I like this reel-to-reel preset. Sometimes I might pull down these high frequencies a little bit. Final plugin in the chain is Maximizer. Another name for this kind of plugin is Mastering Limiter. This is the plugin that will bump up our track's volume while keeping the peak level under our desired output level. So I will set this output to -0.1. That's just a habit of mine. I know some people use exactly 0 and some even -1 dB. As long as you don't go over 0 dB, you're good. I typically use soft clipping as well with this one. By doing so, this plugin creates some harmonics, adding some warmth to the signal. Now on the right hand side in Cubase there's a metering tab. And down here you can select loudness metering. You see, when we are mastering, we need to actually pay attention to perceived loudness instead of peak or RMS. For that we use something called LUFS, which stands for Loudness Units Full Scale. In here I'm interested of integrated and short-term loudness. If you are doing a release for the streaming services, you should aim for -14 LUFS, because Spotify, for example, automatically adjusts your track to that value. If you have a louder track than -14 LUFS, it will be lowered anyway, and therefore you are needlessly losing some of your track's dynamics. You should also pay attention of how much gain reduction you are getting. My personal preference is max 4 dB gain reduction. If I go over that and I'm not in -14 LUFS already, I'm going back to my mix to fix things. So let's push this optimize knob to bump up the volume and watch these meters closely. And by the way, if you're watching this tutorial on high volume, be ready as things are about to get louder now. Sometimes you might need to reset these values, so you can go here and choose Reset on Start. Okay, there's no reason to push it any louder, since we have -14.1 LUFS integrated level, and we played loudest section of our track. If you don't have loudness metering in your DAW, there's free plugin called Youlean loudness meter, which is awesome. I'll leave a link to that in the description. One thing I will do here as well is to add a little fade in and fade out for my track. Last thing before export would be dithering. How dithering works and why we use it is really advanced stuff, and I'm not gonna talk about it too much in this tutorial. But basically dithering helps us to maintain the quality of audio file when we are exporting it to lower bit depth than our source file. So all you need to know is that you should use dithering if your pre-master track has higher bit depth than what you want to export. My pre-master track is 24-bit and I'm gonna export to 16-bit. So I will need dithering. 16-bit is pretty much standard, so if you are unsure what to use 16-bit. To apply dithering in Cubase, we can use plugin called Lin Dither. However, we are going to add this plugin to our master channel and post fader. That's the common practice with dithering plugins. In here, just make sure you have 16-bit output bit depth, and we're good to go. Now we can export different versions of this track. First, I will do a wave export with 44.1 kHz sample rate and 16-bit bit depth. Then I will also do MP3 export, but for that we don't need dithering, so I will bypass this plugin. For the MP3 I will use this high quality mode and choose 320 kilobits per second as a bitrate. Okay, there we go, we are done with mastering. This track is finally finished, but I still have one episode planned for this series. Final episode will be about the steps I take after finishing a track. I will create cover art for it and then schedule a release for it and create content ID so it can be monetized. And trust me, with right services and tools, you can do all that by yourself. So, for the last time, I'll see you in the next episode.